Hello, everyone, and welcome to Better Reading. I was going to say Vanessa Reading. Sorry. Better Reading's event for the beautiful words by the lovely Vanessa McCausland. Before we get started, both of us would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on. For me, that's the Whadjuk Noongar people, and for Vanessa, that's the Guringai people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to the life of this city, or our cities, and our regions. So thank you so much for joining me tonight, Vanessa, and thanks to Better Reading for having us. And
Thank
a big
you so
thank
much.
you to anyone watching. No, if you are watching, Vanessa and I we both have wine because it's actually it is past 5 o'clock where both of us are. So cheers. It's Vanessa's release day today, actually, of the beautiful words. So you can go online and order it from Better Reading if you haven't managed to get a copy yet. There'll be a link in the comments. And do let us know where you're watching from. And if you're having a drink as well, let us know what you're drinking. I've forgotten what type of white wine this is. Hi, Melissa says hello, and so does Christine. So we've got a few people watching already. That's great. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to Vanessa. And then we're going to get her to tell us all the juicy things about this wonderful story, which I finished this afternoon, so should be fresh in my mind. So Vanessa McCausland studied English at Sydney University and has worked as a journalist for almost 20 years. You don't look old enough. I don't believe that that's true, but, that's what it says. Her writing has appeared in the Daily Telegraph, the Sydney Morning Herald, news.com.au, Mamma Mia, Body and Soul, and kidspot.com.au. She's currently a contributing editor at News Corp. Vanessa lives in Sydney with her husband and daughter. Her previous novels include her debut, The Valley of Lost Stories, and The Lost Summers of Driftwood. And The Beautiful Words is her third novel, and the one, as I said, we're going to be talking about tonight. Before we will start, I want to know the cover fairies. You have been blessed by the cover fairies with all your books, haven't you? How gorgeous is the cover?
I know. I'm so lucky. I had Hazel Lamb design this one, and she's an award-winning cover designer. And I was just so thrilled when I saw really each of my covers. They pretty much didn't change from that first PDF that you get from your publisher. And yeah, I don't know. I've been really blessed with the covers. They're all gorgeous.
Yeah, I'm partial to this one because I'm obsessed with pink, so very jealous of this one. And Vanessa's lovely publisher, Anna, is here. So I just want to say cheers to Anna as well. She's drinking bubbles to celebrate Publication Day because we can't do this work without our wonderful publishers. So, yeah, thanks, Anna.
Absolutely.
Now, let's get straight into. I would love if you could tell us a little bit about your book. Give us a pitch, what it's about, and also where that initial spark of inspiration came from, because I'm sure you get this question all the time. Where do you get your ideas from to write a book?
Yes, indeed. So The Beautiful Words is about a woman named Sylvie, and she's a logophile, and that's someone who loves words and stories, only she can't find her own story. So she lives this really quiet, sort of quite reclusive life as a cleaner after an accident when she was a teenager that sort of robbed her of her short-term memories. And then she gets this invitation to her best friend from that time's 40th birthday party off a tiny island off the coast of Tasmania. And she hasn't seen Case in 23 years. They sort of had been cleaved apart. Sylvie's not really sure what happened, where Case just never really spoke to her again after this accident. But she accepts this invitation and she goes to Tasmania and sort of is wondering like what happened that night. She wants to sort of fix things with Case, but yeah, it's quite emotional for her.
She's very brave, really.
Yeah.
Right person. That's a brave thing to do. I don't know if I would have the guts to do that.
It's kind of almost sort of not in character in some senses. She takes this big step, goes to what feels like the end of the world, Tasmania. It's summertime, but it's freezing cold and, really quite remote and isolated. And she sees all these old school friends, and they're all very successful, and they remember her as this brilliant student and writer. And this is not really something she can reconcile with how she is now. But she spends some time with them, and she meets the taxi boat driver on the island, whose name is Holden, but they bond over their love of literature, and they call each other Holden Caulfield and Sylvie Plath, which is very sweet. But he is sort of, I know, it's gorgeous, but he is hiding from the world as well. And then Case and Sylvie discover this inscription in an old book, which seems to be have been written by their mothers, and would indicate that their mothers used to be friends. But that's something that their mothers seem to have hidden from their daughters. So it's a book with quite a few sort of mystery sort of threads through it. But it's really a book about sort of friendship, that sort of real coming of age time when you're sort of 17 and your whole world is ahead of you and your friends are everything. And I just kind of wanted to explore that time, and just sort of the chemistry of women's friendships, and sort of also ask the question, like, what is forgivable between friends? It's also a book that is about the fallible nature of memory. It's about trauma, but I think mostly it's a book about words and books, and really how words can heal and tell the truth.
Yeah, that's a beautiful explanation, and I absolutely loved the relationships between the friends on two levels. We're not going to give spoilers away because the book only came out today, so I'm going to be very careful not to do that. But I definitely am still really good friends with my friends from when I was 17, and luckily we haven't had anything, tragic like that happen. But you grow and you move on, you get other friends, but those friends are very, very they shape you a lot, and they're still very important. Often you can go for years without talking to them. So I think the loss of a friend like that is huge, and you explore that really beautifully, and especially when you don't even know what the loss is. So there's a couple of questions already coming through, and I meant to say definitely we'll ask questions either as we go or at the end. So if I see one that kind of relates to what we're talking about, I will. And I actually was going to ask you, because you mentioned the loss of memory in this book, and I think so it's a kind of amnesia that Sylvie has. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. It's sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, and that is a hard sort of thing to write about often. In romance novels, amnesia, especially some of the older Mills and Boons, amnesia was often a trope kind of used, and I always think it's a really tricky one. I think Leanne Moriarty did it brilliantly in What Alice Forgot, and there's a couple of others, but I've always been fearful of writing about amnesia, although actually I did write a little bit sort of anyway. But what I was going to say is, what was your TJ asked, and this links into this, so your stories are beautiful, she says, Vanessa. I know you've had to do lots of research for the Valley of Lost Stories, and did you have a lot to do for this one? And I was going to ask the same question, so I thought we'd jump there and ask the things that I can think of that you've researched. I'm not going to say everything because, as I said, spoilers. So it's Tasmania. I'd love to know, if you went there and what research you did, or if you've got a soft spot for Tasmania. But also, the amnesia storyline was another one that I imagine required a bit of research, and I know there was something else that I've forgotten. Anyway, book themes, that's right. Let's leave the books for now. Although I have to say, I'm wearing Charles Dickens' Great Expectations book earring, because I thought that was, even though you don't mention that book in there, you mentioned so many books that are classics. They're more recent ones. I love the reference to The Time Traveller's Wife, and I love books that reference books. That's it. So let's just start on amnesia and Tasmania, and what research you had to do for those things, and anything else you want to say about those topics.
Yeah, so with the amnesia, I didn't actually realise that was a trope, luckily. So ignorance is bliss. I just wrote it. But I looked into what's called traumatic brain injury. So that's when someone has a brain injury. It's often like a blunt head trauma, and they lose their memory of the accident, and often like sort of hours surrounding the accident as well. It's just completely blank.
Yeah.
And they can have short-term memory loss that lasts for quite a long time. And that's what Sylvie essentially has. So she has a little notepad where she writes down sort of things that have just happened. She can remember long-term, but then she sometimes can't remember what she did 3 minutes ago. Now, that's something that she had when she was a teenager. We meet her when she's 40, so she's recovered a lot from that, but there's still echoes of that trauma. She walks with a slight limp. She's still got a tracheotomy scar. They're all things that I guess researched. I read people's stories.
She doesn't know what happened that night still, does she?
No, she doesn't. But one thing I did find, yeah. And one thing I found in my research was that it can be like a puzzle piece. So there's just this piece missing, but over time it can actually come back, and the doctors can never say exactly when that will be. And so I just thought that was a really interesting, I guess, idea for what someone would have to struggle with and how frustrating that would be. Yeah. And then in terms of the research for Tasmania, I did get to Tasmania incredibly. I slipped in between lockdowns.
Lucky.
It was actually quite crazy. So I think I went in February this year, and I only went for a couple of days. I was meant to go with my really, really good friend, and I thought that was serendipitous that we go together. Yeah. But it just didn't happen because of COVID and having to change flights and all of this. So I went by myself, and that was also serendipitous because I felt like Sylvie. Yeah. And the book is set partly on Bruny Island, and I went out and did like a day trip to Bruny Island by myself, and it just, I could have been Sylvie really, and it was exactly as I had written it in some ways. It was really stormy and atmospheric and cold, even though it was still summer. And I actually ended up finishing the book there, which was really lovely. And I think the reason I said it in Tasmania was because I started writing it during lockdown, and I was dreaming of getting away from Sydney where there was COVID. And so I started like Googling there's this Instagram page called Tasmanian Shack Life. It's so beautiful. It's all these like really old little rickety shacks on the coastline and all through Tasmania. And I was just like dreaming of being there. And then I was like, yes, this is my setting, because I think I always start with setting before anything else. I need my setting before I can kind of let the story come through in a way. So
that's interesting. You decided to write about Tasmania before you decided to write about friendship and motherhood and amnesia?
Yes.
Wow.
I think so. Yeah. And in terms of the spark of the story, I was trying to think about what that was, because it wasn't some big like bang, this is the idea. But I think what it was is it was COVID. So it was March, the year before this. I think I'm losing track of my years, but
I think we are, aren't we?
And we'd just gone into lockdown, and I was like, oh God, okay, the world is falling apart. So I started writing a lot of poetry, and I think that was my way of dealing with all the emotions of being in like this pandemic world. And then I was doing a lot of beach walking, because I was just, we were all going to the beach, walking around our neighborhood or whatever. And so in some ways, those two things, like being in a very lyrical writing place and also on the beach a lot, I had this idea of I had this image of this man writing poetry on the beach. Oh. And that ended up being Holden, my male character. And then I could hear Sylvie's voice, and it was very poetic and very just very like sort of a lyrical sort of writerly voice. And so those two things, I just followed the trail of those two things.
Yeah.
And
well, I have to say, I think your writing yourself is rather poetic and beautiful. I was going to say there's a few things I wrote down while I was reading it, just little tiny things, some of them, but like the sun caressed her skin, the breeze, a soft breath on her neck, and memories jumping like fish falling flat and hard against the water. Like I just thought your language was really beautiful, really poetic in a way. I also want to ask you one quick question that's very, very important. When you went to Tasmania on your own, did you meet a hot boat taximan?
Yes. No.
Ooh, we'll talk later.
No. Yes, I'm sure there are many of those in Tasmania. It's just made for those sorts of men.
Serena agrees with me. She said your writing is so beautiful. And Wendy says she loves the cover and it sounds interesting. And there's some beautiful people sharing their friendships. Sue says, I have 2 friends that I didn't see for 40 years. And we're all, I'm guessing, she said, I found my friend after 35 years. She lived in Tasmania and I went to see her. That's beautiful. I think social media and stuff, I guess that's one of the benefits. Sometimes people are reconnecting with people that they, have fallen out of, yeah. There's one question here which I'm just going to add in quickly. I'm pretty sure we can all answer it. It's, can anyone read this book or is it for young ones? It's definitely not a kid's book, is it?
No.
No, it's adult contemporary fiction. And I think anyone would find something in this story. There's a lot. And maybe we talk about the structure a little bit because the fact that there's multiple age groups in this character. I mean, we go back to the 60s where Casey's mum is, featured a little bit, and also Sylvie's mum. And so, you get a bit of, glimpse back into those times. Then we also see, is it the 80s, I'm guessing, around that? Yeah.
The 1996.
Yes, that's right. I was thinking they were born in the 80s. Yeah. And so we get that sort of era. And then as you said, that we start when the case is 40, and so it's in current time. So how did you go about structuring this book? Was that always a conscious decision that you were going to have those sort of, I was going to say 3 timelines, but there's actually more because near the end we kind of get a little bit even glimpse into other years and stuff, don't we? Yeah. So how did you was that a conscious decision, or did that, how did you decide on the structure and what was it writing it? Yeah.
I write in a really linear fashion, I think, just to keep it all straight in my head. So I actually just sort of, I'll start in the present and then I'll think, okay, it's time for a 1996 chapter. And so then I'll go into the 90s and then I'll come back to the present, then I'll go into the 60s. I didn't write sort of the whole the whole flashback at once. I just wrote it interspersed as I went. And I think I like writing like that because it kind of gives you a break, I'm keeping myself interested as well when I'm writing, and just wanting to, go into someone else's head for a little while. So yeah, I really just wrote it as it's read. I mean, there were some changes during sort of structural edits and things where I added extra flashbacks and things like that. But I just kind of write in a really straightforward fashion in some ways.
Totally relate. And that just brings me to another writing, a passage in this book, which I found really, connected to me. I'm guessing there's other people out there that would feel it, because I think it's a creative thing or it's just a life thing. It's how you, in the writing world, we have sort of plotters and pantsers often. But I think in life we have sort of planners and people who are a little bit more free-spirited as well and go. So this is a passage that I've really resonated with me on a writing level, but I think maybe it would resonate with a number of people. And it's when Sylvie is later with her love interest, Holden, and they're talking about, how they sort of feel about each other, I guess. And Sylvie says, it feels inevitable. I remember when I used to write stories, the same thing would happen. I'd just get this tiny glimpse, the sliver, like a peek into a world I knew would be revealed to me. But I had to be patient. I had to write into it and have faith that things would play out as they were meant to. And when it was written, I'd look at it and I'd think, yes, that's what it always meant to be. I love that passage because I think it's beautiful in terms of that soul person that, you might have out there, someone that you just suddenly click with, not necessarily romantically, but friends, work colleagues, sometimes you just click with people and it's like, oh, we've always known each other. But on a writing level, is that how you write? Do you sort of feel your way and let the characters tell the story? And then, I think there's a magic in writing. And I think from what Sylvie says, I'm guessing you think so as well. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about your writing process. And the ups and downs.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly how I try and write, where I'm just following like an instinct or a thread really. And some weird thing, I don't know whether you've ever had this happen, Rachel, but sometimes when I'm reading over what I've written the day before, I will write something extra in and then I'll read down 2 lines and I've already written that. It's already there. Yeah. And it's just, sometimes it just does feel like
I've done that definitely. Yeah.
It feels like, well, why did I, like, where's that coming from? It feels inevitable. Like that line was always going to be there. And I tried to write it twice. And I have the worst memory in the world. So it's not like
I'll run for your money, I promise.
It's really weird. So I do think there's a little bit of magic in it.
I definitely do. I also think that, and you possibly had this experience too, that when you are sort of more, I guess, an organic writer rather than necessarily a planner, sometimes you'll write something and you think, I don't know why that's there, or, that's stupid. Maybe I'm not going to be able to make that work. But then later on in the story, if you leave it there and just trust, then something happens and it suddenly makes sense why you put that in. So I feel like your subconscious knows better. And do you experience that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I remember you and I were chatting on Instagram recently, and you said it had taken you 20 books or whatever it was to finally trust that instinct.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I'm quite there yet.
Well, as I say, it's so hard. I think, you always have that fear. Will my subconscious come good for me, or will I have written, 80,000 words of rubbish that actually I can't, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should get to some of these questions from the audience as well, and feel free to add any more in if you want, everyone. So I know there was a book one up here from Jill. She said, Vanessa, what's your favourite genre to read?
I read really, really widely. I love Australian fiction.
We're so lucky
now. Pardon? Say that again.
There's so much now.
I know. So yeah, I've just read Wild Abandon by Emily Beto. I guess that would be sort of I'm not sure how to classify books really, but commercial but written beautifully. That's my favorite book, when something has a really great plot, but it's got really beautiful writing as well.
I think that sums you up. So that's not surprising.
That's what I'm hoping to replicate. But you do. I sort of that's my go-to if I can find it. But I think I read very widely in general. I read a bit of everything.
I think that's the best thing to do if you're a writer, isn't it? Because, you can learn from so many different genres, and, it's the good thing about reading is we can say it's work. Like I sat on the couch this afternoon finishing this book. Like, I wrote this morning and then I'm like, I'm working.
I know, I always feel guilty. I feel guilty because I love it so much.
But I didn't today because I knew that I was doing this. So, it was so thank you.
It was imperative.
Yeah. So Jody says she's picking up her copy from her local bookshop tomorrow. So excited. I'm sure you'll love it,
Jody. Hi.
And Nicole says Tasmania is a beautiful place. Your book sounds great, and I'm adding it to your to-be-read pile. And a lot of lovers of Tassie here. I haven't been to Tassie yet. I was supposed to go this year and last year, but, we know what happened.
Oh,
but I'm really, even after reading your book, even more so. Anna has asked an interesting question. How do you approach writing different periods to evoke the feeling of that time? Really good question.
You know what? Well, I quizzed my mum a bit on the 1960s, because that would have been about the same age as she would have been. And so I'm like, what were you wearing? What was the, like, I think I used music a bit in this. So, yeah, for the 90s, for the 60s, I had the Doors and the Beatles, because I know my mum was a huge Beatles fan. And I think that's a really easy way to evoke the feeling in some senses. Like you can just picture the sound of the Doors. It's very languid and like, I don't know, summery, and that's the feeling I wanted to evoke in that timeline.
Yeah.
And then with the 90s, well, that's when I was 17, in the sort of late 90s. So that was just really an exercise in nostalgia, and that was lovely. And Alanis Morissette and U2, and so I think just using different reference points. I think I mentioned a few different like movies, that kind of thing. But just trying to evoke a feeling of that time is quite tricky. But hopefully I did it. I'm not sure.
I think it was really seamless. Like I always read the top saying what time it was, but I would have probably not needed that. You can sort of just tell from how you did it. So I think you did it really well. If anyone's got any more questions, post them now, because time is running out. I want to talk a bit about the books. Now, you mentioned that Sylvie is what did you call her? Sorry?
A logophile.
A logophile. I should know that. Because I'm a writer. And I was an English teacher, terrible English teacher. Thank God that I'm no longer doing that. And anyway, so I want to know, you mentioned a number of books, especially Sylvia Plath's poetry and her book, The Bell Jar, and of course, Catcher in the Rye, because Holden. In fact, I'm just going to quickly read a little scene to these lovely people about when they met, because I thought this really, I think this is my favourite scene, or one of my favourite scenes. So this is Sylvie is going onto the island, and Holden has come to take her there. She braced herself against the cold. A tiny boat appeared through the mist. Heading out to the island, Sylvia Dane, guest of the Fowlers, a man called. Yes, hi, she called in return, but her voice was lost on the wind. This is our warm Tasmanian welcome. He tied the rope to the jetty, and she passed him her bag and climbed down a ladder and into the boat, blinking back from her lashes. She slipped and felt him steady her, his hand on her back. Sorry, are you okay? I'm Holden. Warm brown eyes hid under a beanie and hood. Yes, hi, she said, breathless. Thanks, it's slippery. Take a seat. Sorry it's wet. I'm the local water taxi operator, or party taxi in this case. Or the main character from Catcher in the Rye? She chastised herself and picked up her figureless glove. This wild weather was making her more uninhibited than usual. Stupid. He didn't look like a literary type. He revved the motor, and the smell of petrol filled the air. You can hardly talk, Sylvia, or should I say, Sylvia Plath. And then they had this joke sort of throughout where they call each other by their, literary names, and talk about having parents who, loved books so much that they named their kids after literary characters. And there's so much. I mean, feels like, to me, a love letter almost to books and writing and words, as you said. So I just wanted to know if those particular books and any others you mentioned, how they played a part in your life. Did you have a thing for Catcher in the Rye and Holden?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did. I didn't come to Sylvia Plath until later. I only read The Bell Jar before writing this, but I had read Sylvia Plath's poems and loved them. But Catcher in the Rye I read when I was, 16, that sort of age, and it just really resonated with me. I loved it. It's just one of those sort of coming of age books where it has like a place in your soul because you were that age when you read it, and it's sort of built into you and somehow tied into your love of books and words. So that one really, and I reread that as well, however many years later. And it was really interesting seeing the different way I look at it now. But Yeah, but I still loved it, and I could see why my younger self had just loved that character so much, because he's such a sort of an outlier and a rebel, and just thinks so differently, and he's a brilliant character. Yeah.
Definitely, I agree. Well, I think we've come to the end of our chat. It's gone so fast. I could have asked you lots more questions. But everyone, do yourself a favour. Grab a copy of The Beautiful Words. It came out today, and it's available on the Better Reading website. So you can click the link in the comments, and it'll take you straight to the place where you can buy the book. It's also available in bookshops, so get yourself a copy. And I hope you love it as much as I did. I'm sure you will. There's lots of people saying thank you and Merry Christmas.
Everyone.
So thank you, Vanessa, for this beautiful book. I really, really enjoyed it. And thank you for the permission to read on my afternoon, when I usually should be writing or doing other things. But so, yeah, thank you so much for asking me to interview you, because I absolutely loved the book, and I loved talking to you as well.
Thanks so much, Rach. It's been so lovely, and I loved your questions, and yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be interviewed by you. And thank you everyone who tuned in for all your comments and questions. Really appreciate you coming along tonight.
Definitely. Have a good night, everyone, and yeah, see you next time.